Welcome to the Library of Congress National Book Festival. If you're here for Hauntings Aren't Just for Houses, horror fiction with Tananarive Due and Grady Hendrix. Ah. Because it is 10:30 in the morning on a Saturday and we would like to talk about ghosts and monsters. Perfect time for that. I'm B.A. Parker. I'm co-host of Code Switch on NPR. I want to give a thank you to the James Madison Council for inspiring sponsoring the Inspiration Stage, which sounds like a state of mind, but okay. Heads up, we'll have time for audience questions towards the end, so get those ready. And at 12 p.m. this afternoon, Tananarive and Grady will be in Hall DE for their book signing. So if you have your book, get that signed, like I'm going to do. And I think that's everything. God, I hope that's everything that I was supposed to do. All right, so I'm going to start with the laziest question, but just because we are here for books. What is the first piece of horror literature that stuck with you? I remember I read The Exorcist when I was 12 and remembered that was a mistake. But what, Grady's Tananarive?
I think it was The Shining when I was 16. My mother gave it to me for my birthday. And it mentioned the TV show Emergency when a fire hose jumped off the wall, which was my favorite TV show. So it was like the book grabbed me and pulled me in, literally.
So yeah, The Shining also for me was a thing. They used to do it on broadcast TV. You know, like an edited version when I was really young. And I remember watching it from behind my uncle's chair. And every time he'd catch me back, he'd send me away. So my knowledge of it was really broken up and kind of weird. But the reason it stuck with me is I used to get sent to Bible camp. And at Bible camp, you go around, you introduce yourselves, and this kid starts freaking out when I get introduced because Grady is the name of the caretaker
Yes.
on The Shining. He had seen the same broadcast and no one had sent him to bed, and he refused to be in the cabin with me. He was like, he's like evil, he's bad. We were like 8. And they moved me. They didn't move him. He was the problem. He's too sensitive. They moved me to the big kid cabin. It was very traumatic. So The Shining's always stuck with me.
That's the one.
And The Shining just also seems like very difficult to comprehend when edited for television.
I remember twins, and the elevators seemed to carry blood to different floors.
I mean, those are the important parts.
Yeah.
Those are the important parts.
And if I could just say, I can't touch the camp story, so I'm not even going to try. But when the movie came out and we went to see it in the theater, there was a scene where they cut to the local news, which was WPLG Channel 10 Glen Rinker, which, because we lived in Miami, was my local news.
Oh, no.
So when that broke into the movie, I thought, what's going on? Like, it was really, again, it was like very, very disorienting. And it was just a cut into the film, and it was a cameo, but I thought the world was collapsing. I didn't know what was going on.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Sorry. So how old did you say you were when you read it?
16.
Okay, so, but when you were, did the stuff with the dad, because I remember Bad Dad in the movie, but in the book it's so different. He's a lot more sympathetic and he's alcoholic, but 16 I guess is old enough to figure all that stuff.
I rewatched it not too long ago, and that part does not hold up well.
Yeah.
He was an abusive father who had broken his kid's arm or something, right?
Yeah.
It was and that was no one's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I was just curious, yeah.
That was great.
Sorry, we're just.
No.
Oh, are you all
please
still here?
do.
No.
They're not here. They're not here. This also goes great because, okay, this is also a problem with, not a problem, but when I watch Silence of the Lambs, I'm from Maryland, so it's all of these, or even The Exorcist, it's DC, it's a little too close to home. Something awful's happening, ooh, let me prepare. A lot of both of yours work takes place in your hometowns. You're from Charleston, you're from Florida. How does your hometown influence the horror worlds that you create?
Well, very much so as I write more and more. Especially, I grew up in Miami, but I was really fascinated when my parents moved to rural Florida to a town called Quincy, about 30 miles outside of Tallahassee. Anyone familiar? No, that's fine. And that's what I modeled Gracetown over. I was originally calling it Graceville, but there's a real Graceville. Didn't realize that. So I changed it to Gracetown. And there's something about these small Florida towns with the red dirt roads and all the secrets and the history that just grabbed me. So every time I visited my parents, I was basically out there with my notebook looking at their woods and just trying to soak up the vibe.
For me, it's more, it's somewhere I know. You know what I mean? And so it's easier to write. I don't have to do as much research. I know it, I can feel it and all that, but I have to stop. I actually, my last book is my last one set in Charleston because the city's so different than it was when I grew up there in the 70s and 80s. It's unrecognizable. Like I would have to go down there and live for a few months to get a feel for it to write about it again.
You already addressed that and how to sell a
Yeah.
haunted house, the fact that it's changing.
Exactly. When I was
Yeah.
writing Haunted House, we were driving down roads, and I would have to sort of not look out it's hard when you're driving, but like not look out the window because I was trying to remember streets the way they used to be, and they're just, you know, they've got Starbucks on them.
Right.
That's kind of sad. I'm sorry. Since we're out talking about hauntings, and a lot of your work is about haunts, and this is about like a haunted house. I've been having this debate with my friends about what is the baseline for a haunted house? Like, what is the bare minimum for it to constitute as a haunted house, and how do you eschew that or change it?
Oh, I was deep in thought. That is a very good question. I wrote a book called The Good House, which is more a book about demon possession than it is a haunted house novel. But I think if there are dead leaves and mud appearing in your house and in your china cabinet, that counts as a haunted house.
That's
Like-
the bare minimum is like
Like the-
dead
all right.
leaves and dirt in the house?
Well, okay. If you find yourself on a regular basis walking through the house going, hello? There's like a vibe of unease, that can count. I knew someone, a writer named Michael Morano, I'll give him a shout out, who told me all these stories about growing up in a haunted house where you would like trip down the stairs because there was a feeling of something as thin as like dental floss that would trip you, but there was nothing there. So maybe that's the bare minimum.
Being tripped?
Dental floss tripwires. So you mean like in a book or in real life, a haunted house? What's the baseline?
Either or. I mean, I don't know if there could be haunted houses in
I
real
feel
life,
like-
but I mean,
Well, I feel like sort of any house is haunted. You know what I mean? Like it's, you've got memories, you've got people who lived there before, you've got, depending on your experience growing up, you know, you don't want to go into that house. It feels cursed to you. I feel like if someone says their house is haunted, you just accept it's haunted. And, you know, and one of the things that's hard though, is with a haunted house, you get this problem, which is, well, two problems. One is, why do people stay, right? Because otherwise you don't have a book if they just move out at the first sign of trouble. And the other is, how do they fix or stop whatever's in there? Because if every haunted house book just ends with people running away, it's like, it's bad for real estate. There has to be a solution. And it's funny, in fiction, in real life, because I've talked to lots of people who live in haunted houses, and everyone's like, well, I'm like, well, why do you stay? And they're like, well, I can't move. It's my house. You know, and you realize, yeah, in real life, that's where you live. It's where you've invested. It's what you've spent your money on. People can't just up sticks and go at the first sign of trouble. Most people I've talked to, like, learn to sort of live with it. But if you're talking to an editor or in LA, talking to a producer, that's not good enough.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that it's got to be a longer, more complicated reason why they're there. When the real reason is most people just can't afford. This house is your biggest investment. You can't just kick to the curb and go because doors slam or there's dental floss tripwires.
See, I'm a wuss. I'm just shaking my head to all of that. I don't care if I grew up there. When I was working on a book called My Soul to Keep many years ago, I had a friend who offered me an opportunity to stay in his house, which is the one I modeled my character's house after, but I was too scared. I was too scared to do it. I'm that person who would be gone at the first sign of trouble. I wrote, in The Wishing Pool, there's a short story called Rumpus Room, which is the real haunting story. And I had to come up with really compelling reasons why she would stay there. The first being she's in a desperate situation and she has nowhere else to go. That was number one. But as she starts to put the pieces together, there is that personal component of where your character's story and their history interacts with the premise. And they have to have an individual reason why they stay, to speak to your point about those producers. Why, not just why would anyone stay, why would this character stay?
Well, and actually, yeah, in fiction, it's funny, it's so much better when the people have a relationship with the house and it's part of their lives, absolutely. It's funny, I met a mother and daughter in a signing line once, and they were telling me after, I think it was Sandy, it might have been a different hurricane that hit the Northeast, but their house, they lost everything. I mean, completely flattened, everything gone. And they were able to, after living in some temporary shelters, get a home that was in their ballpark price range, and it was like sort of, and they move in and it's haunted. And they were very matter of fact about it. It's like, they're like, yeah, it smells like old lady in there, and it often smells like cigarettes, and from time to time something will get thrown. And we have electronics problems, and they're like, what are we gonna do? We live with it. And they were both very frank about it and very matter of fact, and I was like, huh. You know, they're like, what? This is the house. This is where we are. This is what we can afford. But they have no relationship with the house beyond that. So I think in a book it wouldn't be very compelling.
It would be harder.
Yeah.
You know, on one level, and you probably do have other questions.
No.
We're just going to
I mean, I do, but no.
I think, you know, one of the reasons in almost every horror movie that has to do with a haunted space, or even just to make you feel uneasy, you have antiques, old furniture. There's a lot of nostalgia, like in It Follows, a lot of nostalgia imagery that reminds us of childhood. And I think that's in part to hook us, and in part to remind us of death. You know, that life that we knew as children is over. Those grandparents are gone. Those parents, some cases, are gone. And there's something about the antiques that remind us of mortality, and that's why I think so many people do it. So in that sense, a lot of houses are haunted, you know? I mean, the old items that we keep, that we store in the garage, that's why the garage and the basement are like the id of every house, because that's where we store away our reminders that this is all temporary.
And there is also something very weird, and you see this with dolls a lot too. This idea that it's going to outlast you,
Yes.
the house. Like the house is here, and it has seen my parents and my grandparents, and it will see children and grandchildren. The same with a doll, you know. It's there before you, it'll be there after you. It's really unnerving.
My mom literally has a doll room in her house that we have not cleared out, unlike your characters who are in a super hurry. It's like years. My mother passed away 10 years ago. We still haven't cleared out her doll room. But yes. Very scary.
Yeah, also clearing out a doll room, man. That's, you have my sympathies and empathies here.
They're going to be so mad that we waited so long.
I mean, you did write something that includes a doll room, so I don't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And puppets.
And puppets. I also, you just told the cigarettes, the random smelling of cigarettes, and now I'm thinking my apartment might be haunted. So thank you for that. I also talked about, like, when we did talk about haunting, I'm thinking about Tananarive, your story. It was the incident at Bear Lodge.
Oh, Bear Creek Lodge.
Bear Creek Lodge, which feels like someone who is haunted by something.
Yes. Okay.
Which is also a different kind of haunting with the grandmother. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that story, because I've been obsessed with it for like the past month.
Oh my God, I could talk a lot a bit about that story.
Please.
I have to say this, it's the very first time I've had a story nominated for a World Fantasy Award.
Oh.
So I'm very, very excited. And I wouldn't have thought of it as a haunting. I'm so glad you put it that way. The bare premise is it's from the point of view of a 12-year-old boy whose mother is sort of grudgingly sending him to spend time with her dying mother that she has no relationship with, doesn't talk to hardly at all because of her traumatic childhood with said mother, who was a film star in the 1930s. And unfortunately, for a black woman to be a film star in the 1930s, that was not going to be as like a Greta Garbo. She was a brilliant physical comedian, and basically her stage persona was Lazy Maisie, you know, 1930s era cooning, and she had some feelings about that may or may not have contributed to why she was so abusive. But the point is, when the child goes to visit her, that past is haunting the lodge, it's haunting her guests, it's haunting the grandmother, and it's also a creature story, which is why I wouldn't have thought of it as a haunting, but in some ways the creature is also a part of the haunting. The creature symbolically is a symbol, I think, of that toxicity that she had to swallow. And yes, all families are haunted by that. I love in Grady's book how there are so many secrets in this home and so many things that will not be discussed. And that's where the hauntings live. That's the dark corner of every room and every family, is those secrets that you won't discuss.
It's interesting when you say that. I used to be so jealous of England because they have this long, long, long history, and they have this tradition of folk horror and fairies and all these legends and all these folk tales. And I used to think, America's such a young country, we don't have that history. But what you just said is really key, which is that it's haunted more if you don't talk about it. And much more than the UK, we have so much of our history here that we just do not discuss. Or we're just getting used to discussing. And I feel like America's such a more haunted country because of that.
Interesting, yeah.
So we win, go USA.
And people, and people pushing to discuss even less as time goes on.
Yeah, so Grady, when talking about how to sell a haunted house, I will say, do you prefer people to go into the book blind, like not knowing?
Well, I don't care. I mean, like I don't care about spoilers. So if other people do, there's the doors.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no.
I was wondering this while reading the book because the description of the book leaves a lot of stuff out. So when you're like 100-some pages in, you're like, oh, it's about a puppet.
And I apologize for that.
No,
That's
it was the best way. I was like, oh no. So I don't know. I just wanted to ask that because I wanted to know if you want people to go into that with no clue.
No, I'm okay with that. I mean, I think it says in the marketing copy it's full of puppets and dolls.
That means nothing.
I know. Whose house isn't?
Whose house isn't? Last year someone gave me an American Girl doll from like the 90s, and now it's in my basement, and I don't know what to do with it. And
First of all, when you say the 90s, don't say it like it's so long ago.
I'm sorry.
Wow.
My apologies.
That's okay.
One thing I want to ask about for the both of you is you both as writers have this fun balancing act that I'm really envious of. Like with Grady, it's kind of like the gory with like kind of like the sweet. I was almost gonna say like a jelly donut, but like.
That's how I describe jelly donuts. I'll have one of those gory sweet donuts.
And with Tananarive, there is kind of this this edifying component with these thrills, and I wonder is it intentional or is it just like the way that you both write? It just comes out that way. Why are you so good at your jobs?
Okay. That's what I thought the question was, but I wanted to be sure that all I'm trying to do with a lot of the stories or a lot of what I write is to process my own fears and traumas, which is what I think a lot of us do as writers. And I don't like contemporary realism for whatever reason. It always comes to me in purity as horror, so that's where I reside, and I'm happy to do it. So I want to dabble in just a little bit, like what is the racial horror in Florida in a story like Last Stop on Route 9? Or what is it to feel guilty as a mother because you accidentally hurt your child, which is Rumpus Room, and take that real stuff that all of us contend with, that is, universal, unfortunately, and then turn it up to 11 with a supernatural element so that it's not so triggering that it's not fun to read. And fun sounds like a weird word, but if you love horror, you understand what I'm talking about. It's like a roller coaster ride. It's supposed to be entertaining. That's why, writing about racial history, for example, literally a lynching is not entertaining. That is way too real. That is way too triggering and but if you make it a ghost, if you make it a haunted tree, then you can express that fear from life, but in a way that is more fun.
Yeah, for me, I can't do a bummer ending. Like, it may be qualified, people may be missing limbs by the time they get there, but life's had enough, man. Like, you get so little satisfaction sometimes in life with, you know, you get mad at someone, it never gets resolved, you break up with someone, that never, like, I'm just like, I gotta leave my characters. I hang out with them for like a year. I really feel very caring towards them. And so I've gotta leave them somewhere better than where they started. And then the horror part of it, that's just, I mean, I know what you mean about sort of contemporary realism. I can't do science fiction. Like, it's just not, I like reading it, but it's not where my head is. It's the future, it's another planet. And fantasy is a secondary. I want to write about sort of here and now, but not boring. And so that's how you wind up with horror.
Something happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's how I feel like how you get to the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires.
Right.
Like,
Oh,
cheer for that.
very nice.
Yeah. One thing, so on Code Switch, it's a show about race and identity, and we did an episode this year where we wondered if it's possible to do a story about people of color in America without it being about racial trauma with horror films, because it's hard, and I feel like, especially with Tananarive, your answer and your work is yes and no, mostly no.
It depends. You know, it depends. I have to shout out Jordan Peele on the cinema side. You know, there are a lot of great authors out there who've also been forging territory to bring respectability to horror, but Jordan Peele's influence with Get Out was huge. And because his movie was racism as the monster, I think a little while in its wake, there were Black creatives getting opportunities, and those were the ideas that came to the surface first, like racism as the monster. But again, if you lean in too close, it's lynching as horror, right, which is not entertaining. And I think, just speaking for myself, and I think for a lot of Black artists, you have to sort of walk that line between wanting people to know, we want you to know what they did to us kind of thing. There's like a Roy Wood Jr. joke about that. If a Black man is giving a tour of a Black History museum, he starts out in a good mood in the morning, hello, walk this way, wait, and then by the end of the day, look what they did! And there is that, you want to air it out. The gaslighting is tremendous and getting worse. You want people to understand, but to walk that line so that it's fun. I mean, I think there's only one story in this collection that is literally racism as the monster in The Wishing Pool. Not intentionally. I mean, I've gone up and down. The Good House has a lot of racism as part of the core trauma, even though it's more about a demon. There's a sprinkling of it in almost everything I write because it is so much a part of most families' histories, learning to run and hide. That, you know, you have those stories from your grandparents about how somebody had to hide in the trunk of a car and flee because neighbors were jealous about how much he had and how much they didn't have and that kind of thing. But at the same time, and I think that's why my mother loved horror and why she passed it on to me, was her literal experience with racial trauma. Horror gave her an outlet. So even though almost none of the movies she watched for those 1940s Universal movies were not about race, unless it was metaphor, like the mole people, you know? And now it's like, oh, that's why I like the mole people. It was a slavery metaphor. I didn't know that when I was a kid, but now, although they were not Black, and there were no other Black people in that movie, so I wouldn't call it exactly inclusive, but you can use metaphor as a way to express that history and feel real and feel anchored in actual experience, but at the same time, broaden it, and while you air it out, also give yourself something to scream about that isn't so close to home.
I was gonna say that's a great answer.
Huh?
That was great.
Oh.
I think one of my friends said we've now upgraded to generational horror, generational trauma, which is great. Fun for everybody.
Since the beginning.
For the whole family.
For the whole family. This is how you get How to Sell a Haunted House.
Exactly.
Where you have, one thing I really wanted, this is a Grady question of, what is so compelling about like an unreliable protagonist? 'Cause I find in your work, there's like this female protagonist who is like our voice of reason, and then in the first act, you realize, oh, why have I been trusting this lady this whole time? She is out of pocket. What do you find so compelling about like an unreliable protagonist?
Wow, you're like in a blind spot for me because I never think of them as unreliable. I just think of them as people because I don't know anyone. No, I don't know anyone who is not lying to themselves about something important in their life. I mean, I certainly have done that, and I probably have other stuff I'm doing it about. You know, I have definitely, I just don't know anyone. And so to me, for people to sort of have something terrible happen to them and make a choice, okay, that didn't happen, or I will think about that this way, or I will pack that up and put it away. I mean, that just seems like such a human thing. You know, the book I'm working on right now is set at a home for unwed mothers in Florida in 1970, so I'm in your state. You know, and one of the reasons I'm writing it is I had two relatives, a great aunt and an aunt, who were both sent away, as they said back in the day. And neither of them ever talked about it. No one knew about it until they were well into their 60s, 70s. And there were millions of women this happened to in America between the 30s and 73. And the idea that someone has gone through their life and had a child and never talks about that. To me, that's just such on the nose, sort of very big version of what's happened to so many of us. I mean, who hasn't had, you know, something they did terrible to someone else that you're just like, that's not me. That was aberrant. I'm not gonna think about that, you know? Someone who, you know, I mean, this is a terrible thing to talk about, but when I was a very little kid, I had a pet mouse that I killed. I don't know why. I was 9 years old. I was a little shit. But in my head for many years, I was like, well, I really doesn't, you know, all that stuff. But no, I did that, you know? And so I just think everyone carries this stuff, you know? So I kind of think we're all unreliable narrators. That is the most weaselly answer.
It sure was.
But I just think people, that's how we present ourselves and who we are is so different.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe everyone is much more
No.
well-adjusted than I am.
But no, it's just like this, with I Saw a Haunted House, with the Final Girl Support Group, with even like my best friend's exorcism, there is this like, you're going along and everything seems cool and the protagonist is like going through it, but you're kind of like, they're clearly in the right. And then you realize that there's like a whole hidden past. Do you,
Well,
yes.
can I just say something?
Please
But,
do.
So I just thought of a good example that maybe makes me seem a little less like a mouse-killing weirdo. But I think there's a moment when you get involved with a partner and you hit that point where they tell you something about their life that you didn't know, that other people don't know, and you think, oh. And this is something that their friends don't know, maybe their family doesn't, and they're sharing it with you, and you realize it's such this formative part of them. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think that's a pretty common experience in a relationship, and I think that's sort of part of it. Like, my characters are polite. They're not just gonna dump it all in your lap as soon as you meet them, you know?
Yeah.
It takes some time to warm up. Sorry, and I
get
interrupted
it.
you. Yeah.
No, I get it. Do you? Do you get the question of? Do you get the question of what draws you to female protagonists a lot?
Yeah. What's
What's your template answer?
So, I don't know. Like, there's sort of two parts of it here. One is when I did Horror Store, my first book, I just made the protagonist. Oh, thanks. I made Amy. That just seemed to fit, you know, someone work in retail. And then when I did my best friend's exorcism, I needed really intense friendship. And in 10th grade, the female friendships I saw in 10th grade were so much more intense and demonstrative than the male friendships. I had close male friends, but it was a pale shadow. And then when I did We Sold Our Souls, about a female heavy metal artist whose all her music's been stolen and she's just sort of had this horrible life because of it, it was gonna be my dude book. I was like, 2 books with women, dude book, dude anger, all that. And it wasn't coming together. And I went to a really terrible 2016 election night party. And these friends of mine were very in for Clinton. And by the time my wife and I got to the party, it was like 9:40 and like Florida had been called for Trump. And like, you know, the artisanal charcuterie platter was curdling, and
It's not a party anymore.
Yeah, one of the hosts had gone in the bathroom and wasn't coming out, and the other one was just doom scrolling. He's like, yep, and so my wife and I sort of noped out of there after like 30 minutes. And in the elevator on the way down, I was like, if I'm gonna write a book about someone who considers themselves worthless, who's been told they're totally worthless and have zero value, for it to feel real in 2016, it has to be a woman. Like it can't be a dude. I mean, I think for my sisters who I talked to after that election a lot, and a lot of female friends of mine, they took that election very personally. I'm not saying everyone did, but the people I know, it felt like a real personal repudiation of themselves as women. And I was like, and then the book started coming together. And Southern Book Club, I wanted to write about my mom, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it just seems to keep happening. But I've got 3 older sisters. I was essentially raised by a single mother. I've been married since I was 20, like to a woman. Like, you know, a lot of people very close to me are women. And so that's what and they're kind of cooler.
I mean, we are. Yeah, we are. Yeah, we got it. Is there anything under the horror umbrella that you haven't touched yet that you'd like to, or is there anything that you absolutely won't?
Good question. I'll answer the latter part first. Just sort of jumping onto what I've said previously about being too on the nose with real life trauma. Like I can't, and no shade to a lot of you who do this, I can't listen to true crime podcasts. There are a lot of headlines that are too much for me as I'm scrolling on my threads or wherever I am in the million places I am now. Real life trauma and horror are horrible for me. That's why it was very hard for me to be a newspaper reporter for 10 years, right? To interview people who've just experienced such bad loss that it's made the news was not my idea of a good time. And that I try to keep away from because my joy is in the supernatural, the paranormal, curses, demons, ghosts. I've never had a ghost encounter, not one that you couldn't interpret as being a million other things. Like anything I've ever had, it felt like a brush with the supernatural, a dream, or an item of jewelry drops in the same spot 3 nights in a row. But it felt like a message, you know, so it's what I'm bringing to it. I think if I had in fact someone tell me once, who was from, I believe, Trinidad. She told me, oh, well, if you had had any experiences like you write about, you wouldn't write it. And I think she's probably right about that.
For me, it's zombies. I'm a zombie guy. Like, that was my first joy. I saw Dawn of the Dead way too young. When I'm stressed, I have zombie anxiety dreams. And I think it's just too close to me. I just can't do it. And the thing that kills me is I was talking to a producer, and he mentioned this idea, and I kind of ran. It was a decent zombie idea, and I ran with it and made it a really good one. And I wish I could do it, but I can't. This guy, you know, he would have to be involved, and I don't, you know. But it was like, oh, God damn it. There was my zombie book, and it's untouchable. Yeah, zombies.
I mean, there's a lot of zombies. It's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
But Tananarive, so what is the attraction to haints, to ghosts, to spirits? Is it just because you feel connected to it?
You mean in general? Or
in general, but also in your literature.
Yeah, I like to make the joke, you decide if it's funny, that if you're watching a horror movie and you have the character going through the house going, hello, they'd better hope whatever answers or doesn't is a ghost. Because most often, ghosts just want to be seen and remembered. I lived. Even The Ring, as horrible, that's more like a demon ghost.
Yeah.
I was. Look what happened to me. That's what they want. A demon will ride you for generations. That is, and I think the part of me that was raised by my late mother, Patricia Stevens Due, along with my father, who's still living at 88, John Due, were both very active during the civil rights movement. And the only nonfiction book I've written was with my mother, Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights, because I wanted to help her tell that story of the foot soldiers, as she called them, black and white, throughout Florida and the rest of the South, who stood up when other people were too afraid or too comfortable to do that, who gave money, who marched. She taught me that activism could take so many forms. And that was a way of kind of resurrecting the ghosts. Like, not everyone made it onto a postage stamp. Not everyone got a holiday named after them. It's just like, I did this happened to me. And I think that part of my DNA to help elders, to help those who have been forgotten tell their stories does drive me in part, even if it isn't literally a ghost story. Maybe that's why I love writing historical horror. I like bringing older eras to life so we can understand these people were real and this happened to them. So yeah, my upcoming novel, The Reformatory, is all about sort of a restorative justice through hates. It's coming out in October. My great uncle died at the Dozier School for Boys in the 1930s, and I wrote it literally to give him a better story. So that one is so on the nose why I would write about ghosts, the one that's coming out in the fall.
Yeah. I'm really excited. I didn't know that there was something else coming out. I'm stoked for that. One of the things, I read your short story collection, Grady.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But no, I loved, I think in the preface, you wanted to do stories about the past because it's so idealized and you wanted to show that these people were idiots.
Yeah.
That it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. I really feel like there's this view of science and progress as this ever-rising sort of arc. And it's like, well, no, there were people measuring skulls and, explaining fossils and just making terrible, terrible scientific errors about things all through the 19th century. Louis Agassiz, who's one of the great scientific minds in America, he's got buildings at Harvard named after him. Thousands of people came to his lectures. He was big on measuring skulls and had all these really bunk racial theories based on it. And even his contemporaries thought he was an idiot. But I love that kind of I am a man of science and that confidence,
Yeah.
how could I get this wrong? I look like a man of science. So yeah, so those White Street Society stories, which are, the gentleman adventurers, I just wanted to keep dropping these guys who are men of science into different scenarios where they just ruin everything. And it's also an excuse me, I'm a huge history nerd, so there's one of those stories set in DC that gave me an excuse to look at 19th century DC history and Elizabeth Keckley, Mary Todd Lincoln's seamstress, who was really an amazing individual. And so it's also an excuse for me to do research, those stories.
What does your research look like for the both of you when you're making something like How to Sell a Haunted House, or when you're curating your short story collection? What does that look like?
For me, it's really about the details. The book I'm doing set in 1970, it's what's a television schedule for these stations, and what are people wearing? I order lots of catalogs online from the era and stuff.
Yes.
The thing that's killing me right now is it's very, very hard to find really good resources about, because I have black characters and white characters in this book, how people were wearing their hair as teenagers in 1970, what they were wearing, what clothes were cool, what clothes were busted, what words. So that's where I really go. When the book's over, I do sort of a show instead of a reading kind of thing to promote my books. I do an event. It's a one-person thing.
Really?
Yeah, so that's when I do all my research that's fun. I read all the books, I do all the things, and do that then. But while writing the book, it's all about making sure I get that neighborhood or that era or whatever it is just right.
Yes, catalogs. I have the Sears catalog from 1897, I think one from 1907. Any of you who are writers, there's such a great, if you need to know how much rubber bands cost, were there rubber bands? Yes, there were, because here they are, 5 cents. So the trouble is you can get lost in the research. And The Reformatory took me 7 years to write. In part because it was a difficult subject and I didn't like being in 1950 Florida with this 12-year-old boy, but in part because there's so much to research, reading all the memoirs and then reading about Florida history in general, and you really can get lost in that process. I think ideally I would be doing a research dump at the very beginning and then on an as-needed basis. And often I think writers, especially if you're writing historicals, you feel like you have writer's block because you can't see the room or you can't see the scene. So if I find myself not seeing, that's what it is. It's that specificity. Like Walter Mosley, I like to say, is such a great prose stylist. He has a very spare style. He's not going to describe the room to death, but he will describe that refrigerator handle with such clarity that the rest of the kitchen fills in around it. And that's kind of like the way I like to use the research, like the rubber band or the odd item from history you didn't know was there. Or did you know that Scott Joplin's friends called him Scotty, which is what his biographer told me. It's like, oh, that sounds like I really know what I'm talking about. To just enough so that the reader believes you that they are in 1890 or they are in 1950 and they can just enjoy the story.
That's so interesting because, like, when reading the Wishing Pool, that story in particular, it feels so lived in. Like I'm in the house with the daughter and the father with dementia, and I wonder, well, what made you decide to choose the Wishing Pool as the forefront of the whole thing?
Well, I wrote. This is a very special story to me, because it came out of the pandemic, like a lot of you. I had not seen my father in a year and a half or more because of the pandemic, and he is 88 years old. I did not know what to expect. My sister, who lives with him, if he had declined, it would be a gradual thing. For me, it was going to be like a really stark difference, I thought, between where he had been and where he was. So I tried to prepare myself for the visit by reading The Wishing Pool, which is about a woman visiting her father. Now, my father does not live in a cabin in the woods, nor have I ever lived in a cabin in the woods. It's just my favorite setting for horror. But that's, I think, where the realism comes from. But I didn't realize, for example, that I was writing things that were true about my dad. Like he was writing notes, which just details his grandchildren's birthdays and his birthday, and he was just like listing things on his pads. I always grew up watching my dad writing on his pads. I used to steal them to write my stories. So now, instead of trying to solve racism, which is what he was always doing when he was a younger man, he was harvesting all these memories from his life and just writing them down. And that's something I wrote about in the story, which was kind of an eerie mirror. And I'm happy to report that my visit with my dad went way better than Joy's visit with hers.
That's comforting.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank both of you for the best summer of reading that I've had in a long time, because most of my job is reading about like a prison abolition and how the immigration policy is terrible. But because of your work, I went back to like reading Shirley Jackson and Octavia Butler, and I wonder what you two read for inspiration or for funsies.
Oh, see, this is where the mind blanks out. There's so much, and I think it's easier for me to start with the contemporary readings, which are going on in my head. Johnny Compton, The Spite House. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Let's clap.
Clap, write it down.
Is it Aaron Alexander who wrote Jackal? Victor LaValle, of course. Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indians. Yes. There's so much good horror out that I'm having to remind myself that there's other kinds of writing, right? And
Is there?
Yes, there is. But so much good horror out. Silvia Moreno Garcia, Alba Katsu, I could go on and on. So much good horror.
So yeah, I'm right now in the middle of a book, and so I'm reading everything for research. So I'm reading books that are like all paperbacks from the 60s. They're like Witchcraft USA, and How to Be a Sensuous Witch, and
Wait, talk about that later, but how can I be?
it actually winds up being a cookbook, which is really disappointing. I know. But you do, so a couple of things I've read recently that really blew my mind. Lauren Bukas's new book, Bridge, is, everything's the multiverse right now, everything everywhere all at once, the whole Marvel thing. And she's done a multiverse horror novel that has one of the great bad guys in it I've ever read. Daniel Krause's Whale Fall, which is like told in real time about a scuba diver who gets swallowed by a whale, is really good. And then I read a lot of nonfiction. And there's a book, this is so lame, but there's a book called Super Infinite, which is a biography of John Donne, the poet, by Catherine Rundell, I think. That it's a really non-traditional biography because there's not that much is known about John Donne, but it's about how Elizabethans folded paper. It's about what their clothes. It sounds boring as hell. It blew my mind. It was just such a beautiful book, and I've realized that there's something. So I'm a sucker for a cover song. I feel like you were saying about a ghost, especially when a bigger musician covers a smaller musician's song, it's kind of a way of seeing like, I see you, you know? And I think for musicians, you want to be heard. And so when someone bigger covers your song, that's like, it's this really beautiful moment. And I feel like there's something with biography where it's a writer saying to someone long dead, I get you, you know? Oh gosh, I can't remember her name, but she wrote that Buster Keaton biography recently, Cameraman. Dana Stevens, I think. But again, it's a non-traditional biography. It sort of takes his life, it goes through, but she's really determined, because what we all think of Buster Keaton is he died drunk and broke and talkies. She wants the world to know he died in love, financially solvent, he wasn't, you know, that he died happy, and it's so passionate on her part. And so I feel like in a way, biography is the literary equivalent of a cover song. It's sort of saying, I see you, I hear you, I want people to see you the way I see you. So I'm kind of a sucker for him, which, you know, makes me sound like such a middle-aged man.
I say embrace it. We're doing great. I feel like that's everything. I want to leave room for audience questions if you have any. See people coming up.
I'll be brave. First of all, thanks for your time. This was very insightful, and I'm glad that we all get the chance to kind of listen and pick your brains a bit. So I'm going to flatter your egos first, though, before we get to that. I think you're both really funny, and I think there's something to be said about horror and comedy being like two sides of the same coin, right? Like you bring up Jordan Peele, who before he was like the director Jordan Peele, he was Peele of Key and Peele. Probably one of the best like comedy sketch shows in the past couple decades, right? So I wanted to ask you how you think of like eliciting emotional reactions and like humor as a part of your horror writing, and like how you identify the relationship between the two as you go through your process.
I love that question, and I'll answer as quickly as I can. Horror and comedy are definitely two sides of a coin for me. They were my way to deal with the pandemic. I love stand-up. I listen to stand-up almost every day. I'm reading horror almost every day. And when I had a chance to interview Jordan Peele for a part of my podcast, actually I used that interview on my podcast, a Life Writing podcast, he talked about that relationship. It's setting up a moment of emotional release. And whether it's horror or comedy depends on whether you're trying to set up a scream or set up a laugh, but the principle is exactly the same. The audience is expecting one thing to happen and something else happens. And I haven't tried this, but I've heard that the difference between Get Out being a comedy and a horror movie is if you play funny music while you're watching it.
And just to add to that very briefly, I don't know a single horror movie that doesn't have big laughs in it. I mean, even Alien wouldn't work if Yaphet Kotto and Harry Dean Stanton weren't this great, hilarious double act. The Thing has one of the great laugh lines of all times. Like, I don't know any horror movies that don't have jokes in them.
All right, cool. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you both for your time. I was curious if you guys could speak a little bit about what the period between when you first got serious about writing and when your first novel or story was published was like, and like, how did you work on improving your writing during that time, like your craft, and also like, since the first novel, how have you been trying to improve things? Like, what kinds of workshops did you go to? What kinds of like critique relationships did you do, or like exercises did you find useful?
I'll answer first as quickly as I can. I never discovered workshops really as a young writer. I didn't get an MFA even. I studied creative writing as an undergraduate because I was lucky that they had a program that allowed you to do that. But I was a journalist for 10 years, trying to make my way into the industry. And frankly, my first short story that I sold was never published because the magazine went out of business. And there was a long, dry period between that and my very first publication, which was my novel. And I would say that the key was authenticity of voice. That short story, while it might have been a professional short story, had a white male protagonist. Not that I wrote it that way to sell it. I didn't even realize I was doing it. But by the time I graduated from school, I was writing white male protagonists. And it was reading Mama Day by Gloria Naylor that helped me see myself as a Black woman within metaphysical fiction. And following my authentic voice is what was the key to me being a published writer.
I mean, for me, I was a journalist, not a real journalist. I did cultural coverage. You know, I hate saying journalism because people think you're working the city desk or something. I was doing freelance cultural coverage, book reviews, interviews, all that stuff. And I did that for about 10 years. And then I went to Clarion, the science fiction and fantasy writing workshop, which really changed my life because it's really hard to take yourself seriously as a fiction writer if you haven't sold stuff doing that. And I was there with 20-something other people who took what they did seriously. And I was like, I've got a choice. I either start taking what I'm doing seriously or I'm the asshole here. I'm like the one person in this group who doesn't. And that sucks. And so it really changed my life. That was the only workshop I ever did. And then it was about 5 years before I sold a book. But in that time, I was writing constantly. I wrote 4 books that never sold because the only way to learn how to write a book is to write a book. I was freelancing, I was doing everything I could. Unfortunately, I had a partner who had a steady job where no one was ever turning off the lights. But it took a while. But it was, for me, it was just writing, rewriting, having someone read it, tell me it sucked, writing it again.
Just even that one person to tell you it
Yeah.
sucks is really important.
Thank you.
What is your favorite thing you've ever written? Book, story, scene, line, your favorite thing?
Well, this one won't be a fun answer. It's just the memoir I wrote with my late mother because it's the memoir I wrote with my late mother. You know, that will always feel like the most important thing I've ever done, freedom in the family.
So I'm not good at short stories at all. I'm very bad at them, actually. But I wrote a short story for a John Joseph Adams anthology years ago about mad scientists, and it's called Mofongo Knows, and it's about a supervillain ape with an atomic brain that's now retired and old and elderly and in a circus freak show, and just his hate relationship with the man who put him there. I really love that giant ape so much. So I don't even know if that anthology is still in print, but it means a lot to me.
Hi there. Thank you both for this, or all three of you rather. So my question is, obviously horror is a genre that tends to be heavily informed by contemporary societal fears and anxieties. There's a ton that is heavily informed, for instance, by the international trauma of the First World War, which we may not necessarily recognize, but it still holds up. So how do you write in the genre in a way that it feels universal, even if those things, even if things like the specific feeling of the 2016 election night might pass from memory?
That's a great question. I mean, I think even if it's not conscious or specific, all of us as writers are influenced by those societal fears. I had a revelation, I thought, during the Trump era. It's like, oh, zombies are sort of a metaphor for this fear of the other taking over for some people. That's not what they were for me. For me, it was like fear that my neighbors are gonna come and burn our house down. You know, that is like sort of an intergenerational trauma. But for whoever you are, zombies have a different representation of something that's big and cultural, which Romero knew when he made Night of the Living Dead. It was about the social change of the 1960s as told through zombies with a historic Black lead. I think it's always going to resonate, and it's always in the eye of the reader. So even if I mean something specifically, that might not be what the reader takes away. It'll be their view of the societal change.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think you're 100% right. I mean, I agree with that, and that's sort of my take. But I also feel like we sort of start with an advantage as horror writers, because the one thing everyone in this room has in common is we're all gonna die. Like, that is the one thing. And that's great. I mean, but that's what gives our lives value. If you're immortal, who cares what you do tomorrow? Who cares what you do with the next 100 years? You're immortal. There's more where that came from. We all have to make choices. And okay, I chose not to become a writer because I became a lawyer. I chose to have children, but I gave up on my dream of being a free solo mountain climber to do that. Like, we all make these trade-offs, and they have value because they're trade-offs, because we don't get everything. And I think that condition for all of us, that ticking clock, that's what we have in common. And for me, I think that's really beautiful. And I think horror is the one genre where that's sort of kind of the keystone of it.
Thank you.
Thank you both for your talk today. It's been very enlightening. If you were to want to start writing horror, where and how do you start?
Oh, okay. I have something very specific, especially if you're a new writer. I suggest short stories, right? So a short story where you take something, a real life horror or trauma that you can either portray as it was or disguise it so your family doesn't get mad at you. Find a supernatural way to express it, either an effect from it or make it supernatural instead of realistically grounded. And then find a protagonist, she'll probably be a lot like you, for whom it is the best or worst thing that could have happened to them. Usually it's worst in horror too, but sometimes the worst thing turns out to be the best thing, right? And that, it's kind of, I hate to call it a template, but if an editor says to me, oh, your story's due in 2 weeks, and I haven't a clue what I'm gonna write about, that's what I go to. What has creeped me out lately, horrified me lately, that I haven't written about yet? How can I make it supernatural in some way? I mean, it's not all a conscious process, but that's the way I would break it down for you.
Yeah, and I would just say one of the things for me is I agree with short stories. It's because it's so good to complete something.
Yes.
It just, you can't see it until it's done, and I'm a rewriter. You don't have to show it to anyone. It can be busted and terrible, but get it finished and go back to it and see if you can make it better, and then do another one, and then do another one. Don't get hung up trying to make one perfect. Just keep going. But it took me forever to realize write what you know is actually a really smart piece of advice. You can write from the point of view of a group mind fungus. It doesn't mean you have to be a group, but you put yourself in there. What does pain feel like to you? What scares you? What does love feel like to you? What are you comfortable with? What are you uncomfortable with? And also cheat. You really need to see your characters. Like, they really need to be there in front of you. And if you're airy on a character, give it the name of one of your friends. Give it your mom's name. Give it, if you like Zach Galifianakis, make it Zach Galifianakis. You can change those names later, but whatever you can do to make them real and then do something terrible to them.
Yes.
This will be our last question.
Hi. But one thing I love about haunted houses is how it brings a lot of history to the modern day, how they get steeped in history, and that's what makes it haunted. So I was just thinking about how haunted houses are portrayed in movies. One of the most, I think, biggest franchises right now of that is The Conjuring. And I wonder if, like, with like the villain of Annabelle, how horror movies create villains out of something that's snappy villains, and how the exorcism trauma makes something that's a Catholic tradition scary. Like, if I go to seeing the exorcism of Emily Rose, I would be scared of exorcisms and not really understand the history behind the Catholic rite, or something like Annabelle to not be something to be scared of, but something to be interested in, want to learn from.
I agree.
And so the question is, like, sort of how do you put that forward? Like,
No, like how horror movies create villains or create exorcisms to be scared of, but we really shouldn't be. So my question is, do you think horror movies adapt horror books correctly, or no? Because one of the reason why this is more of a question for you, Gary, is your book, My Best Friend's Exorcism, was made into a movie last year. So I just wondered of how horror movies get adapted into movies and kind of lose itself into the movie.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You know, one of the things I learned, because I do a little bit of screenwriting, not nearly as much as you do, but one of the things I learned very early is everything in a movie has to be external. The worst thing, the thing you cannot show on screen is someone thinking or someone changing their mind. What does that look like? You have to show things that are physical and real and external. Books are 100% internal. They're either even a third-person omniscient narrator, you're getting the book from someone's point of view. You're getting someone's internal experience. They're scared, they're not scared, the emotional state. And so they're really two radically different languages. And you have to hope that the people adapting one to the other speak both languages fluently. One of the things that was interesting with My Best Friend's Exorcism is it's set in the 80s and all this, and they did, I thought, a really great job with the 80s part of it and everything. But they played very loosey-goosey with sort of like the exorcism and what was going on and all that, which was fine. They wanted the spectacle, not the internal thing, but the external stuff was so much easier for them to portray because that's what movies are so much better at. It's really hard to do internal stuff in a film.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. With that being said, this concludes our presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank y'all.
I saw the heroes.